Allow me to interview Dr. Gorka on stage. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Sebastian Gorka. Sebastian, thank you very much for being here today. We appreciate it.
Thank you. It's an honor. Thank you.
I want to jump straight into the thick of it. There have been reports...
Before you start,
yes.
Go ahead. Go ahead. No, please.
Okay. There have been reports in the media that you have affiliations with different anti-Semitic Hungarian orders, such as the Vitezi Rend, which is said to have had ties with the Nazi regime. There are reports that you were sworn in secretly as a member of this order. You were shown wearing a medal belonging to this order. I'm sure you're aware of the sensitivity that this has for the Jewish community. What can you say to address those reports?
Well, first things first, thank you for this opportunity. And I'd like to thank everybody who has stood by me and this administration for the last 15 weeks. Specifically, and I apologize in advance if I forgot you, but the two Davids, Ira, Bruce, Jeff, Mort, Joel, Noel, Noah, you know who you are, okay? And especially thank you to Rabbi Billet, who wrote just this Friday an amazing piece. So let's get to the heart of the matter. I have spent my life fighting against totalitarian ideologies, and so did my father. My father was 9 years old when World War II broke out. As he says in his memoirs, in 1944, after the Nazis took over Budapest at the age of 14, he escorted his fellow Jewish schoolmates who were forced to wear the Star of David to school every day and back to stop the local German forces from assaulting them or spitting on them. That's my father, okay? Later, he was forced to resist the communists. He fought back in university. He was betrayed by Kim Philby, arrested and tortured as a 20-year-old, often by secret police officers of the new communist regime, who just a few months before had been members of the fascist Arrow Cross. I take that heritage very seriously, and when my father was awarded a medal in 1979 by anti-communist members of a splinter order outside Hungary, I take that as a mark of their suffering, and I am proud to wear that as a response to everything that we face today. Because for me, jihadis are linked to fascists, because they are totalitarians. And that's why I am proud of working in an administration that, look, we can talk about bluster, we can talk about rhetoric, but the bottom line is, nobody, not one person, not at the Forward, not at Politico, not at any other place, has found one sentence that I've ever said in the last 46 years that is anti-Semitic or anti-Israel. You'll find the opposite. You will find the opposite. And because we are pro-Israel, we must be attacked. Whether it's the president, whether it's Steve Bannon, whether it's Steve Miller or myself, we are friends of Israel.
But you must understand, Sebastian, you must understand the sensitivity here. Right? This is a Jewish community here in the United States that feels very, sometimes insecure, feels at times that medals and affiliation with such orders could bring in types of sentiments into the White House that could be to the detriment of the
But look at the facts. Look at the facts. Look at what the president has said. Look at what the vice president said just this week. We were celebrating the Independence Day of Israel. And what did the president say through the vice president? We will always unapologetically stand by Israel. That's the truth. That's the truth. And we're talking about an order. I don't want to get lost into the weeds. We've got important stuff to talk about. There are members of this order, like Vilmos Nagy, who was recognized in 1969 as a righteous among the nations by Yad Vashem. That's a member of the Vitez. Let's think about that for a second. Okay? So the politics in Central Europe is often very complicated, as you know.
Okay. I want to switch gears for a moment. Before Donald Trump took office, there was a lot of skepticism about his approach to Israel. Right? Pro-Israel, anti-Israel, what does he think about Israel? We see that he's keen on trying to renew peace talks between Israel and the Palestinians. He met last week with President Abbas of the Palestinian Authority. He's making a trip to a very historic visit to Israel as his first trip, or part of his trip first overseas trip as president. I know it's not your specific portfolio, but what can you tell us about how the president views this alliance between Israel and the United States?
How he views it?
Yeah.
Again, it's our closest relationship. Our closest relationship. Look at who he's put in charge of this issue. It speaks volumes to the commitment of the president to Israel and to peace in the Middle East, by the fact that he put Jared Kushner, right, as his point person, and Jason Greenblatt as his special negotiator. That tells you just how committed he is. And on top of that, let's think about something. Who was this man before he became the commander-in-chief? This was a businessman who wasn't just successful, he was crushingly successful in the hardest market in the world. What's that market? New York real estate. So if there's a man who can bring a deal, who can bring peace, it is President Donald Trump.
His overall trip, though, which includes stops to Saudi Arabia, Israel, the Vatican, it's interesting, kind of the three monotheistic religions, the main centers of that. Is there some overarching or overall message here with this visit?
I think that the recognition of how important faith is, yeah? We had an administration who for the last 8 years said, didn't take faith seriously, may have gone to church or may have gone to temple, but saw it as a networking exercise, nothing more. And importantly, they didn't take our enemies' understanding of religion seriously. When you spend 8 years saying you can't talk about religion, you can't use the word jihad, it's all about jobs for jihadis, it's not about any kind of ideology. This administration understands the power of faith, the importance of faith, and the importance of those who are using faith to harm us. And I think that's the message that's being sent.
You've been said to have been one of the architects behind the change in rhetoric that we've noticed by President Trump already back in the campaign. The use of the term, which was, as you mentioned, highly controversial during the previous 8 years, of radical Islam, right? Why is that important? Why is it important for those two words to be said in conjunction with one another?
Imagine if in 1944, as America and her allies are preparing to storm the beaches at Normandy. Imagine if anybody, the president, theater commander, a local unit leader, had said to the troops, okay, is your weapon ready? Is your chute ready? Is the barge ready? Oh, one last thing. When you land on the beaches, ready to fight, whatever you do, don't use the word Nazi, because you could annoy the Germans. That person would be fired, court-martialed, drummed out of the government, okay? We've had enough of that. We talk truthfully about the threat, and that's why people who don't want the truth to be told attack us. I think it's fascinating. Who are the leaders of the attacks, the slanders against this administration? Scratch it a little bit deeper, and who do you find? People who are either all connected to the BDS movement, or people who are all pro-JCPOA Iran deal. Doesn't that tell you something? So we say, speak truthfully about the threats, and the president said, remember all the fake news about, oh, he's going to climb down, and he's not going to talk about it the way he did during the campaign. Look at a video of the joint session of Congress. What was the moment where the president stopped and stressed 3 words the most? It's when he stopped, looked at the camera and said, the enemy is radical Islamic terrorism. We are not stepping down. We are not watering down our message. He understands the threat and he will obliterate it.
There are those, though, who say that this obsession or this way of categorizing and characterizing the threat makes you and the administration, but even particularly you, Islamophobe, right? That you're actually against Islam as a religion.
I had the honor of spending 6.5 years in the Defense Department teaching counterterrorism. And 40–50% of my students were Muslim officers, colonels or above. I learned from them the threat to this country. And when an Egyptian tells me that it's not a war with Islam, it's a war in Islam, I listen to him. When the Jordanians tell me that this is a religious war, but not against a religion, that would be absurd. Because I always ask people, do you remember that fighter pilot burnt alive in the cage? What religion was he? Was he Orthodox? Was he an Episcopalian? He's a Muslim, burnt alive by ISIS. So this is a war inside the faith for which version will be dominant. And we have to help our Muslim allies win. That's why the meetings with the King of Jordan, the meeting with President Sisi are so important. After Israel, these are our closest allies.
You know, one big change that we noticed, and the whole world noticed, was after the chemical weapons were used in Syria. Back in 2013, there was something called a red line, which was crossed and crossed again, but then somehow disappeared and never found again. But this time, when chemical weapons were used, Tomahawk missiles were fired and launched. What does that mean from the larger, if I take a zoom out for a moment, what does that say to the larger strategy of this president, of his intervention foreign policy?
Two things, most importantly. Number one, when the last administration, in its own national security strategy, said that we are going to lead from behind, what does that mean in English? Follow. Thank you. Right? It's not leading. It's the opposite. It's standing back and letting other guys, usually bad guys, fill the vacuum. We have ended that. As the Vice President said about 10 days ago on the deck of the USS Ronald Reagan, he said another very important thing. When the President wrote in his introduction to the National Security Strategy, we are now going to follow strategic patience, the Vice President said, the era of strategic patience is over. We are going to lead. We are going to lead. So what does it mean? It means that when the President, and he took that decision, it might have been over a great chocolate cake, but he took that decision, okay? When he decides to launch those 59 cruise missiles, when his local commander dropped that Moab bomb in Afghanistan, I think everybody understands. You definitely understand. Everybody who understands geopolitics understands those two events were not about Afghanistan and not about Syria. They're about the return of American leadership and sending a very simple message. We are back and we will lead and we will, with our friends, destroy our enemies.
So when we think about moving towards the future, there's a lot of talk now about what's happening in Syria, splitting it up into different parts, pieces of land, and America not being able to fly over different parts. Do you have a vision? Is there a clear vision that you can maybe outline for us what might happen in Syria, which is obviously a very big concern for the state of Israel?
When you play poker, I don't know if you play poker.
Not too much.
If you played poker, do you show the other people at the table your playing cards? It's not a good idea. The last administration did that. They said, we're coming into Mosul in 2 months or 3 months. You do not tell your game plan in advance. It's not good strategy. What we talk about are objectives. And right now, we're not going to posit the future of Syria. We're going to do one thing. We're going to make sure that the conflict ends. And on top of that, we've sent the very clear message. You will not, nobody will use weapons of mass destruction against unarmed women and children. The objective is to stop the war.
So lastly, if I look to ISIS for a moment, the president has laid out a plan to defeat ISIS, right? And I think a lot of the world is wondering how will that exactly work. So you might give me the poker answer again, but possibly not. But what I also want to maybe get at is, so ISIS, obviously a terrorist organization that is a major threat to a lot of the stability of America's allies in the region. But we in Israel face other terrorist organizations such as Hamas in the Gaza Strip, Hezbollah in Lebanon, also fighting in Syria. Is there a view from the White House of these terrorist organizations as one?
So, what are we going to do? Again, we're not going to tell our strategy, but a couple of key points. The President has been explicit before January 20th and afterwards. He has absolutely zero interest in invading anybody's countries and occupying them. That is un-American, and this administration will not do it. What we will do is we will help our friends fight their own wars for themselves. So that's why it's crucial that our Sunni allies understand that now they can trust us. This is not the Obama administration, but we will help them to fight this war. On your question with regards to these organizations, it's patently obvious, and the President knows this absolutely. Every jihadist group whether it's Shia or whether it's Sunni, whether it's Hezbollah, whether it's Hamas, whether it's ISIS, whether it's Al-Qaeda, they all feed from the same genetic code. What is that genetic code? The jihadi ideology of the Brotherhood. The Brotherhood started it all in 1928. And we know that they share the same goal, and that goal is against everything we represent. I won't talk about strategy, I'll talk about objective. This is just Sebastian Gorka. The objective we have is a very simple one. We know we will have won when the black flag of jihad is as reviled and rejected around the world as the swastika of the Nazi Third Reich. When that happens, we will have won. And we didn't rehearse this, so I didn't get a chance to ask you, but I have to commend you, I don't know if it was your choice, but to hold this event on the 7th of May was delightful, because as you all know, the 7th of May is the day that the Nazi Third Reich surrendered to the Allies. So, thank you.
Dr. Gorka, thank you very much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.